Thank you very much for taking some time to come to our talk. I appreciate this is the post-lunchtime slot. So I am judging how successful this is based on how many people stay awake. And I was just saying, hopefully I will, because otherwise I'm falling straight into the front row, because this is not the most stable stool in the world. So yeah, thanks for coming along. My name's Pete Coulter. I'm the regional director for GFT. Our stand is right there, stand 140, with the team in grey hoodies. And we are a software consultancy. We opened in Manchester just before Christmas, and we're about 8,000 people around the world, do a lot of work in financial services, but very unknown in Manchester, and that's kind of what I'm here to change, get our brand out there, and get ourselves known in the market. So that's what I do, and I'm going to introduce you to my guest and fellow speaker here, Darini, if you'd like to give us an introduction.
Thank you so much, Pete, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Darini Chandrasekhar. I'm a customer engineer at Google Cloud. So in my day job, I'm a customer engineer specializing in data analytics, but I'm also a passionate sustainability advocate. So I'm really excited to talk about the role of technology in sustainability.
Cool, thank you, Darini. So as you will have seen, our subject, smarter technology for a sustainable future, is a pretty wide subject, and we could go off in a lot of directions on this one. So I think just to get the ball rolling, Darini, tell us a little bit about your role at Google and how smarter technology and in particular sustainability plays into that role, if you can.
So as I said, I'm an engineer, and my main focus in my day job is data and analytics. And we believe at Google that data is a key enabler in solving for sustainability. So a lot of my work overlaps with that. And sustainability for me has been a personal passion for the last 5 years or so. So I was just telling Pete that I stopped using single-use plastic about 5 years ago. I'm not always 100% successful, but yeah, I try really hard. I also turned vegan a year ago. And so these are some of the small steps that I'm taking in my own little way. But the bigger chunk or the bigger impact is in actually enabling other organizations, other consumers, other users of technology, and figuring out how technology can enable people in making more sustainable decisions.
Yeah, that's great. And we'll get into the some of the initiatives that Google are doing very shortly. But when someone says to you sustainability or green tech, as I did a few days ago, where does your mind go? What's the first thing sort of springs to mind from your angle and Google's angle?
For me, from a work point of view, the first thing that comes to mind is infrastructure. So the IT infrastructure that your workloads, your applications run on. So for any business, IT is either a vertical that enables the business or it's a core function. So the way we think about it at Google is from that angle. The other way to look at this is if you are a business that works with, retailers, end consumers, whoever that might be, whoever the consumers are of your product or services, then thinking about how you can bring sustainability to them. So I think that's the other angle that I would think about.
Cool. So you've got quite an ambitious sort of moonshot at Google, which is what it was declared as. And I'm going to read it out verbatim for you here, which is that Google is carbon neutral today, but aiming higher. Our goal is to run on carbon-free energy 24/7 at all of our data centers by the end of 2030. Now that's a huge ambition, and obviously, Google are one of the biggest cloud providers. We've also got other competitors around there as well. Like you say, it's a huge challenge. What are there challenges you can tell us about that you found doing that? What are the main ones? Are there any that you know about internally where you think, that's a big problem we've got to try and solve? Anything that constantly comes up at all?
Well, the most obvious problem is that the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. So how do you always ensure that you've got renewable energy? And I think one way to do that is to optimize your energy utilization, to use less energy in the first place. And so that's the first problem we're trying to crack.
And when we were sort of preparing for this, we talked a little bit about retail as well and some of the challenges there. Do you want to just expand on that? Because I know you've got some experience working in the retail with retail clients.
Yeah. So my day-to-day job, I actually work with retailers, e-commerce, and large CPG organizations. For them, the biggest problem is around transparency in their supply chain. So right from sourcing to ensuring how they bring their products into their factories and how they get it out into other retailers or end consumers, that's a huge problem because it's not the upstream and downstream calculation is really hard. And from a carbon accounting perspective, mostly carbon accounting is done across what we call 3 scopes, Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. direct, indirect emissions through energy use, and the last one is indirect in your upstream and downstream. Scope 3 is a huge challenge for most retailers. So that's one of the problems that we are hoping we can help solve.
And if we've got a whole range of people at this event, if it was one of the key roles, I guess, certainly from a software point of view, or maybe a platform point of view, is application architecture or solution architecture. If there are any enterprise architects listening or budding enterprise architects, where do they get started? How do they start thinking about the right thing in applications and platforms when it comes to sustainability?
So the first thing is that legacy architectures tend to be archaic and inefficient from an energy perspective, because you've always overestimated for volume and size and cost, simply because you need to know that you can handle peaks and troughs, right? That changes when you move to the cloud. So any hyperscaler, you only pay what you use for. So I think that's one, thinking about your IT infrastructure and how you architect your applications wherever, whichever provider you choose to go with, thinking about that, I think is quite crucial. The second thing is applications. So a lot of times, technology companies tend, or even businesses tend to think that moving to the cloud is a solution. Not necessarily. I mean, you've also got to think about re-architecting your applications, so you're actually leveraging the capabilities, the native capabilities of cloud. So thinking about infrastructure would be the first thing. Consider a carbon net neutral provider. That's the first step, I would say. The second thing is thinking about re-architecting, optimizing your applications so they're more efficient. And the third thing is figuring out how your business model needs to shift overall, because I think that's another conversation. It's a tougher conversation to have, but it's a conversation that needs to be had.
And is that, do you find, is that a challenge? So you're going in, again, working with lots of different companies and clients. Are their mindsets actually shifting? Are you finding that the green and sustainability is more of a token gesture at the minute, or are you seeing fundamental changes in attitudes from C-level people, top of the house? Is it filtering down, or are you still finding it a bit kind of like, yeah, we'll do that, but we've got a load of other stuff to do as well, so maybe not?
I would say in some ways the pandemic has accelerated the pace at which this conversation is going. Many big organizations are very serious now. And they are making very public statements and ambitions around net zero. So I definitely think that that shift is happening. A lot of people haven't figured out, as I said, even Google haven't figured out everything. We've done great things in many areas, but we don't have the solutions for all of the problems. So I guess many organizations are making these ambitions public because they believe, again, legislation is going to come, policy change is going to come. Everyone wants to be prepared. So yes, I think the shift is absolutely happening.
Do you want to name and shame anyone who isn't? I mean, it's just me and you, just fireside chat. No? Okay, we'll talk about that later, that's fine. So one topic I did want to talk about and get your thoughts and views on is our initiative around green coding. So if you want to know any more about GFT and green coding, by the way, the QR code behind our heads here will take you to a page that will give you plenty of links, or you can swing by stand 140 and talk to the team about this. So green coding for us is a set of practices and principles that we bake into our team's learning plans, and that's all about writing efficient code, or writing code that produces applications that will diminish the sort of energy use of the application. And we believe that all of our team can play a role in that. So it's not just about, the obvious one is software engineers themselves thinking about lines of code and taking the bloat out of systems, but designers as well, right? How many images you pull down, size of those images can help. Agile leads can think about feature, and with product owners can think about feature bloat in systems, or team working remotely versus everyone traveling in on, or if you're going to travel in, use public transport. So there's loads of lenses that we can apply to green coding, and we take our team through that. We're training our team, and we're trying to influence our clients as well. And our view is that, look, whilst at the micro level, that might take time, and the changes and improvements might be minimal, and they might have a very minimal impact. If you add them all up, if an application or a bit of code is being run millions of times a day or whatever, that's going to add up to a lot less energy use in the long term, and you can play a part, right? And every individual IT professional can start to apply this lens in that way. So that's something that we're doing. I'm interested to get your thoughts on that, and also if you've seen any other sort of innovative, similar initiatives elsewhere with the other clients.
I can speak from a platform point of view because that's sort of my area of expertise. So some of the various big players in this space, and I can speak again for Google Cloud. Our platform enables developers, data analysts, data consumers, producers to be more efficient with how they use resources that are available to them. One way we do that is we have a feature called Active Assist on our platform. What that effectively does is it provides, every time you go onto your console and you're managing whether, it could be a data pipeline, it could be an infrastructure pipeline, it could be any of that. It will actually give you recommendations around idle resources and also give you an estimate of your savings in terms of cost as well as carbon emissions. So I think it's a useful nudge to have something like that on your platform. The other thing that we do is, from a platform angle, is that if you run a whole bunch of IT workloads on some kind of a platform, it would be useful for you to understand what the carbon footprint of that is. And I think a lot of us are going on that journey. On Google Cloud, you have that feature available. So if you were a Google Cloud customer, your emissions from a net neutral operationally, from a carbon perspective, would be 0 to begin with. You'd know what your gross carbon footprint looked like, because at the end of the day, when you run a workload, it has potential carbon emissions. We neutralize it for you as from a platform point of view, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't have gross emissions. So it's good for organizations to understand that. And as I said, small nudges, better coding that you've mentioned, thinking about right sizing, for example. Again, a lot of platform providers today talk about right sizing. So you don't need to overestimate. You don't need to set up a VM that is bigger simply because you need to account for a Black Friday peak. You don't need to do that anymore. Your platform auto scales.
So anyone who's spoken to me about this recently, and I know we had this conversation as well, is there's a bit of a kind of retro cool element to this as well, right? So I'm old enough to remember coding several decades ago. I know I don't look that old, it's fine. But back then, hardware and compute and memory was not as available as it is now. It's kind of on demand now. You can just get it, as much of it as you want, right? Whereas I remember building applications in a call center, and we were writing. We had reasonably powerful PCs back then, and we put it out on the call center PCs, and it wouldn't run because we weren't very agile back then, and we just dumped it out there. But the hardware just couldn't cope with it. And I think there's a really interesting sort of angle here about these are not new practices when it comes to writing software. These are just good, efficient practices. And the world of Agile has done some great things about speeding everything up, and I'm a massive advocate of that and have been for some time, and it's great to fail fast and learn fast. But I think there's this other lens now, there's this other element that needs to come into the conversation about that might not be as, it's still important, but there's something else in there as well that we need to weigh up against that, and I think that's really cool. How do you, I guess, thoughts on that would be pretty interesting, and then I've got a follow-up about demographics as well.
Okay. From a application point of view, again, because I have a background in data, I can speak to that. So I think writing performant code, making it portable, compatible, open source, so containerized, all of those are best practices. I think they're fairly obvious to most developers. But I think having some of those useful nudges on the platform helps. The other thing is, whether you're a data producer, consumer, engineer, whoever you might be, I think thinking about how you process that information is quite key. Do you really need to run that report every single time? Think about, how much energy is being utilized. I think a lot of these things need to be embedded within your organizational best practices. But I think a platform or a technology provider can go some way, or even consultancies such as yourselves can go some way in ensuring that these are embedded as, the standard, rather than, something that needs to be thought of as the gold standard.
And so on demographics, when you're talking to clients of Google, do you notice a difference between people who are talking about this and people who are not, in terms of any sort of demographic split at all?
The larger enterprise organizations tend not to be that agile, so sometimes they need to be convinced about, whether it's a move to the cloud or move to containerization or optimal practices around, software development in general. But I think it's easier, and for me personally, I've moved from enterprise retail into what we call digital natives. So we term cloud natives or digital natives as organizations for whom technology is core to their operation. So it's a lot easier for me. I don't have to talk or convince anyone about, why cloud is important. These are organizations who have started with technology in their core. But I think for enterprise, you've always got to make a business case, whether it's an enterprise organization or a smaller startup or a tech company. So I think, but there is no question, nobody denies it. It is about prioritizing, understanding where this falls within the overall remit, and making the case for it. And we've been successful with enterprise companies as well.
That's cool. And so push yourself forward, say 5 or 10 years now, and thinking about where do you think this is, where do you see this going in let's say 5 years or 10 years if that's too close? How do you think this is going to impact priorities for enterprises? Do you think this is going to be, where do you think this is going to play out over the next 5 or 10 years, and how important is it going to be?
It is going to become incredibly important, right? So everyone understands that this is important, and whether or not they do it, policy change, legislation is going to come, and everyone wants to be prepared, right? And the way technology organizations can help is we are sort of at the forefront. We can be that key enabler. We can allow organizations to bridge various gaps. Now, these might be infrastructure gaps, technology gaps, or data gaps. Data gaps is one of the ways we at Google believe we could help businesses, because as I mentioned the supply chain example before, if you take a retailer as an example, it's impossible to understand where a box of grapes came from, right? It comes through several tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. It's impossible to understand the carbon footprint and the emissions associated with that from an upstream and a downstream point of view. And where technology can help is by providing estimates, information. So Google has information. I don't know how many of you in the room have heard about Earth Engine, for example. It's a use case that we've used successfully in the past, where we've mapped out the entire world using maps and Earth Engine. And we are able to take that satellite imagery, process that as regular data in a tabular format, and derive insights out of it. And we've been able to bridge gaps for some of retailers through that way. So it's just one of the many innovative ways that we could help businesses.
Yeah, that's really cool. So we haven't got that long left. So a couple of sort of wrap-up questions. In terms of the audience or anyone who's working at mainly a tech company, let's say, what advice would you give them right now? What can they start doing? What conversation should they start having right now to either get this on the agenda at their company or get it up the agenda on their company?
The first thing I would say is try and educate yourself. I don't claim to be an expert. I'm always learning, reading about this. And I think that's the first step, is whether you're an individual or you see yourself as a decision maker, an influencer in your organization, the first step is educate yourself, learn about the topic, understand where you believe your organization or your team or you yourself as an individual could make a difference. And I think start from there. I think little steps always help. That's how we've started. We as an organization, we do this. So I spoke about Google's role as a technology organization, but I'd also like to take a minute to talk about how we do it within our teams. So we've got cafes, we've got micro kitchens. We've implemented machine learning algorithms there to reduce food waste, for example. So that's a small example of how we do this. This is not something we make money out of, but it's a small way to go about thinking about incorporating sustainability in the everyday.
That's really good. Thank you very much for that, Dharini. We are pretty much out of time. A couple of things I just wanted to wrap up with. If you want, Greater Manchester obviously also has a huge interest in green and sustainability. Andy Burnham set us targets for 2038 to be a carbon neutral city, for example. So this is very much a relevant point for this city, as well as the tech and digital industry as well. The QR code will give you links out to several articles that we think are quite interesting if you want to scan that, like I say, or pop by our stand. And finally, and ask us any questions, by the way, because we don't have time for questions, so do feel free. Dharini and I will be around for a little bit over by our stand there. But also, finally, just a huge thank you as well, Dharini. So Dharini was a very, very late substitution for us because of an issue our previous speaker had. Unfortunately, he couldn't be with us. So a massive thank you, Dharini, for coming up and filling in, and actually, because this very nearly got cancelled. So thank you very much for coming up and doing that. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you very much.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Brilliant.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.